The morning Thomas Hale found himself holding a jacket over a woman's head in the rain outside a train station in Portland, he had no idea that by the end of the week his life would look nothing like the quiet, orderly existence he had built for himself over the past 3 years. Thomas was 41 years old. He worked as a furniture restorer, spending his days in a workshop that smelled of walnut stain and linseed oil, bringing damaged chairs and tables back from the edge. He had been divorced for 3 years from a woman who had loved the idea of stability until stability started to look too much like routine. Since then, he had kept himself busy, kept himself decent, and kept himself alone. It was a Thursday afternoon in early October when the rain came down hard and fast, the kind that turned sidewalks into rivers in less than 5 minutes. Thomas had just stepped out of the hardware store near Union Station with a bag of wood screws and sandpaper when he saw her standing under the overhang by the ticket office, looking out at the downpour like someone who had forgotten how weather worked. She wore a gray dress and no coat. Her hair was pulled back in a way that suggested she had done it in a hurry. She was somewhere in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, and she looked like she was trying very hard not to cry. Thomas did not make a habit of talking to strangers, but he also did not make a habit of watching people get soaked when he had a perfectly good jacket. He walked over, pulled off his canvas work jacket, and held it over her head. She looked up at him, startled. Her eyes were green and tired. Then she said something that made no sense at all. "I know you." Thomas blinked. Rain drummed on the jacket. He looked at her carefully, searching for recognition, but came up empty. "I don't think we've met," he said. She shook her head quickly, as if clearing something away. "No, sorry. I just meant—" She stopped. Then she tried again. "You look like someone who would do this. Stop in the rain for a stranger." It was an odd thing to say, but Thomas did not press it. "You need a ride somewhere?" She hesitated, then nodded. "If you're offering?" They ran to his truck together, the jacket doing almost nothing against the rain, and by the time they climbed inside, they were both drenched. Thomas turned the heat on. The windshield fogged. She sat very still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. After a moment, she said, "Thank you." "Where are we going?" Thomas asked. She gave him an address on the east side, near Hawthorne. It was a 20-minute drive in good traffic. In the rain, it would be closer to 30. Thomas pulled out onto the street and drove in silence for a few blocks before she spoke again. "I'm Claire," she said. "Thomas." "Thomas," she repeated, as if testing the weight of it. Then she smiled, just barely. "You're a careful driver." "I've got expensive tools in the back," he said. "Can't afford to roll the truck." She laughed, soft and real, and something in the cab shifted. The rain kept coming. They passed cafes and bookstores and corner markets with hand-painted signs. Claire stared out the window like she was memorizing the route. After a while, she said, "I just came from a lawyer's office. Signing papers. Final divorce papers." Thomas glanced at her. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said. "It's been over for a long time. Today was just the paperwork." She paused, then added, "He wasn't a bad person. He just thought love was supposed to look like a performance. Flowers on schedule, compliments that sounded like they came from a script. When I stopped performing back, he didn't know what to do with me." Thomas nodded. He understood that more than he wanted to admit. "My ex-wife loved the idea of a stable man," he said, "until stable started looking too much like boring." Claire turned to look at him. "You don't seem boring." "I restore furniture for a living," Thomas said. "I spend most of my day sanding wood and replacing hinges. It's not exactly thrilling." "It sounds like you fix things that are broken," Claire said. "That's not boring. That's just useful." They reached her address a few minutes later. It was a small craftsman house with a blue door and a porch that needed new boards. Claire unbuckled her seatbelt but did not move to leave. Instead, she sat there, looking at the house like it was something she had to steel herself for. Finally, she turned back to Thomas. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" she asked. "I owe you for the ride. And the jacket." Thomas should have said no. He had work in the morning. He had a cabinet waiting in the workshop that needed its veneer stripped. But something about the way she asked, like she was hoping he would say yes but prepared for him to say no, made him nod instead. The inside of Claire's house was warm and smelled faintly of lavender. There were books stacked on the coffee table and a blanket thrown over the back of the couch in a way that suggested someone actually lived there, not just decorated. Claire disappeared into the kitchen and came back a few minutes later with 2 mugs of coffee and a plate of shortbread cookies that she admitted she had not baked herself. They sat on opposite ends of the couch. The rain tapped against the windows. Claire tucked her legs under her and wrapped both hands around her mug. "So," she said, "furniture restoration? How does someone get into that?" Thomas told her about his father, who had been a carpenter, and how he had grown up in a house that always smelled like sawdust. He told her about the first chair he had ever fixed, a wobbly kitchen chair his mother had been ready to throw out, and how good it had felt to make something broken into something whole again. Claire listened without interrupting, her eyes steady on him, and when he finished, she said, "That makes sense. You have careful hands." It was an oddly intimate observation. Thomas looked down at his hands, which were scarred and calloused and not particularly impressive. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you do?" "I teach high school English," Claire said. "Mostly American literature. Some poetry. I try to convince 16-year-olds that Whitman matters, and occasionally one of them believes me. Sounds like an uphill battle." "It is," she said. "But every once in a while, a kid writes something that breaks your heart in the best way, and you remember why you started." They talked for another hour. The conversation moved easily, without effort, touching on books and bad movies, and the particular kind of exhaustion that came from caring too much about your work. At some point, Claire's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, frowned, and put it face down without answering. "Everything okay?" Thomas asked. "It's my sister," Claire said. "She's been checking in every hour since this morning. She means well, but she treats my divorce like it's a death I need to recover from." "Do you?" Claire considered the question. "No," she said. "I think I've been recovering for the past 2 years. Today was just the part where it became official." She looked at him. "Does that sound cold?" "It sounds honest," Thomas said. She smiled at that, and it was the first real smile he had seen from her all day. Then her phone buzzed again. This time she picked it up, sighed, and stood. "I should call her back before she drives over here." Thomas took that as his cue. He stood, set his empty mug on the table, and moved toward the door. Claire walked him out onto the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving the street shining under the streetlights. The air smelled like wet pavement and pine. "Thank you," Claire said, "for the ride, and the coffee, and for not making this weird." "It wasn't weird," Thomas said. "It could have been," she said. "Most things are." Thomas pulled a business card from his wallet, the kind he gave to clients, with his name and shop address printed in simple block letters. He handed it to her. "If you ever need anything fixed," he said. "Chairs, tables, anything." Claire looked at the card, then back at him. "What if I just want to say thank you again sometime?" Thomas felt something shift in his chest, small but unmistakable. "That works, too." 3 days later, on a Sunday morning, Claire showed up at his workshop. She was carrying 2 coffees and a brown paper bag that turned out to contain donuts from a place down the street that Thomas had been meaning to try for months. She stood in the doorway looking around at the half-finished furniture and the tools hanging on the walls and said, "This is exactly what I pictured." Thomas wiped his hands on a rag and tried not to look too surprised. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Claire said, "but I wanted to. Also, I have a wobbly bookshelf at home, and I thought maybe you could tell me if it's fixable or if I should just throw it out and start over." They drank coffee and ate donuts while Thomas asked her questions about the bookshelf. It turned out to be a simple fix, something he could handle in an afternoon. Claire offered to pay him. Thomas waved her off. "Consider it a return favor for the coffee." She stayed for another hour, watching him work on a dining table someone had brought in with water damage along one edge. She asked questions about wood grain and finish types, and Thomas found himself explaining more than he usually did, caught up in the pleasure of having someone genuinely interested. At one point, Claire ran her hand along the surface of the table and said, "It's amazing. You can't even tell it was damaged." "That's the point," Thomas said. "You fix it so well that people forget it was ever broken." Claire looked at him, and something unspoken passed between them. Then she said, "I should let you get back to work." But she came back the following week, and the week after that. Sometimes she brought coffee. Sometimes she brought lunch. Once she brought a bookshelf that was not actually broken, just to have an excuse to stay. They fell into an easy rhythm, the kind that felt less like dating and more like something that had always been there, waiting for them to notice it. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October when everything changed. They were sitting on the back steps of Thomas's workshop, eating sandwiches and watching the light fade over the industrial rooftops, when Claire's phone rang. She looked at the screen, and her expression went flat. She answered it anyway. Thomas could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was enough. Claire's voice went tight and controlled. "No, Nathan. We've been over this. The papers are signed. I don't care what your mother thinks, because I'm not interested in being fair to someone who spent 2 years trying to turn me into someone else." She hung up. Her hand was shaking. Thomas waited. "That was my ex-husband," Claire said finally. "He wants to meet, to talk. He says he's realized he made a mistake and wants another chance." "What do you want?" Thomas asked. Claire looked at him. "I want him to stop calling. I want to not feel guilty for being happy. She stopped. Then she said very quietly, "I want you to tell me I'm not crazy for wanting to move on this fast." Thomas set his sandwich down. He turned to face her fully. "You're not crazy," he said. "And it's not fast. You've been moving on for years. You're just doing it without him now." Claire's eyes went bright. She looked away quickly, but not before Thomas saw it. Then she said, "He's going to keep calling. He doesn't believe I'm serious." "Then make him believe it," Thomas said. She looked back at him. "How?" Thomas thought about it. Then he said, "Let me come with you. To meet him, not to fight. Just to stand there. So he knows you're not alone." Claire stared at him. "You would do that?" "Why wouldn't I?" She did not answer right away. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, soft and quick, like she was testing whether it was allowed. When she pulled back, her face was flushed. "Sorry," she said. "I should have asked first." Thomas smiled. "You can ask next time if it makes you feel better. And if I don't want to wait for next time, then don't," Thomas said. She kissed him again, slower this time, and the workshop went quiet around them, except for the distant hum of traffic and the wind moving through the alley. The meeting with Nathan happened 2 days later at a coffee shop downtown. Thomas wore a clean shirt and his least paint-stained jeans. Claire wore a blue sweater and looked like she had not slept well. Nathan was already there when they arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cappuccino he had not touched. He was tall, polished, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Thomas made in a week. When he saw Claire walk in with Thomas, his expression flickered. "Claire?" Nathan said, standing. Then he looked at Thomas. "I didn't realize you were bringing someone." "This is Thomas," Claire said. Her voice was steady. "He's with me." Nathan's smile went thin. "I see." He gestured to the empty chairs. "Please, sit." They sat. Nathan looked between them, clearly recalculating. Then he leaned forward and said, "Claire, I know I hurt you. I know I took you for granted. But I've had time to think, and I realize now what I lost. We were good together. We can be good again." Claire shook her head. "We were never good, Nathan. We were polite. There's a difference." "That's not fair," Nathan said. "I gave you everything." "You gave me a performance," Claire said. "And when I stopped performing back, you didn't know what to do with me." Nathan's jaw tightened. He looked at Thomas. "And who are you exactly? The rebound?" Thomas met his gaze without flinching. "I'm the guy who showed up," he said. "That's all." "How noble," Nathan said. The sarcasm was sharp enough to cut. "Claire, you can't seriously be choosing this over what we had." Claire stood. "I'm not choosing this over anything, Nathan. I'm choosing me. And you should have been enough of a person to want that too." Nathan stood as well, his composure cracking. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," Claire said, "but it's mine to make." She looked at Thomas. "Let's go." They walked out together. Nathan did not follow. When they reached the sidewalk, Claire let out a long breath, and Thomas realized she had been holding it the entire time. She looked up at him, and her eyes were wet but clear. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't need me," Thomas said. "You handled it yourself." "Maybe," Claire said, "but it helped knowing you were there." They walked back to his truck in silence. The city moved around them, indifferent and ordinary. When they reached the truck, Claire stopped and turned to face him fully. "Can I ask you something?" "After today, I feel like I should be nervous," Thomas said. She smiled. "You probably should." "Are you always this careful?" "Depends what I'm trying not to break," Thomas said. She did not answer right away. When she looked back, her expression had changed. "Well, for the record, I'm not made of glass." Thomas kissed her then, slow and certain, and the street disappeared around them. 6 months later, they were sitting on Claire's porch on a Saturday morning in April, drinking coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up. The blue door had been repainted. The porch boards had been replaced. Inside, Thomas's tools sat in the corner of the living room next to Claire's stack of essays waiting to be graded. They had not planned it. It had just happened, the way good things sometimes do. Claire set her mug down and leaned her head against Thomas's shoulder. "Do you remember what I said the first day we met?" she asked. "You said you knew me," Thomas said. "I did," Claire said. "And I was right. I just didn't know it yet." Thomas wrapped his arm around her, and they sat there in the morning light, quiet and whole. "What would you have done if someone you just met told you they knew you? And have you ever felt like you were waiting for your life to start until someone showed up and reminded you it already had? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.